And we're clear for episode 104. Welcome back, comrades. This is Gaming with Austin. Today, we're going towards episode 104 of the Utopian Community series. Let's talk about politics for this episode since today is election day. In America, we vote for we hold election day. America holds elections every 2 to 4 years. Like, every 2 years. Plus, by the way, I already voted. Because this election year means new governors. When it goes to voting, I'd vote for the political parties that adhere to the left wing. Because I am a leftist. And I see racism as a threat to our society. I see it as a threat to the working class. When it goes to voting for governor, almost always I'd probably vote Democrat. Or the Green Party, or the Working Families Party. Because for me, I'm all about making society better for all of us. And creating a new workers' international. I'm not like those old school racist Democrats. In fact, I'm the straight up opposite of racist. In fact, I stand against racism. Because I see it as a threat to our society. I see racism as a threat to society. Same thing with speciesism. Which is basically being racist to animals. That's what speciesism is. Being racist to animals is what speciesism is. It's basically a form of racism, where instead of being racist towards people of different ethnic groups or tribes, it's basically being racist to animals. That is what speciesism is. Through selective breeding, we could turn dogs into herbivores. But cats, the process will take even longer. It takes even more generations for obligate carnivores. Racism is just wrong. Capitalism causes so many problems within our society. Racism drives... Ignorance breeds racism, which breeds even more ignorance. It's basically like a runaway effect. When it goes to speciesism, we need to end it. We humans need to be compassionate towards all animals. Truth, like with socialism, brings ultimate, like, on paper, certain freedoms would be destroyed. Like with socialism, I know people might have to start paying more taxes, but in the long run, those taxes they'll pay more of would probably end up being, will very likely end up being worth it. It'll be worth those. The free stuff you need will end up being worth your tax dollars. It'd definitely be worth it. Like, let's talk about the fascist country in my novel for a second. The dictator in the fascist country, like, which would be known as the king, or emperor, he'd be living in a really gigantic castle. He'd be a monarch who would rule the country completely with an iron fist. It'd be a combination of absolute monarchy and it'd be a combination of both royal and military dictatorship. Because, you know, Saudi Arabia is a royal dictatorship. Like, with knighthood, to prepare people for knighthood, they'd go through really intensive training. They'd have to endure a lot of physical pain, literally. Like, basically, with the knights, when it goes to genetics, they would still be the same species as everybody, all the other citizens. Yet, genetically, they'd have a better genetic advantage when it goes to strength. Not only would they be clad in heavy armor, they'd be selectively bred to grow claws. They'd be selectively bred to grow claws. They'd be genetically manipulated to grow claws. They wouldn't just wield a sword, they'd also have claws. They'd wield a sword in case their claws break. Not only would they have really sharp claws, they'd also have really sharp teeth too, because they would learn how to bite their enemies. The dictator, like, outside of uniform, his haircut would be similar to both Stalin and Hitler. Like, it would be combed back like Stalin, the sides would be shaved like Hitler. And inside the castle of the dictator, it'd be very luxurious. One thing they'd want people to believe is that they're the most technologically advanced country in the world. They have... when in fact they'd be one of the least technologically advanced countries in the world. Like, they'd... only the elites, government elites would have access to electricity. Only the government elites would have electricity. Those who are the most loyal to the ruler, the absolute ruler, they'd have really advanced smartphones. Like, the technology in, like, for most of the residents who live in the capital, their technology would be sort of like that of America in the 1930s. Mid-1800s. One method the dictator would use for ethnic cleansing would be deliberately causing a famine. Yes, he'd deliberately cause a famine. As part of his genocide program. Like, how many people would he end up killing by the end of the novel? Like, before he ends up assassinated. In the Communist Revolution. In the Communist Uprising. The dictator would probably end up killing around 450... He'd probably end up killing around 5% of the world's population. He'd probably end up killing 5% of the world's population. Under his brutalitarian regime. Like, what type of racism would the dictator adhere to? He'd be extremely anti-Semitic. Yes, he'd be extremely anti-Semitic. He'd be anti-Hispanic too. Like, what will the dictator's nuclear weapons use? They'd use radioactive isotopes of cesium. And water. With the radioactive isotopes of both hydrogen and oxygen to maximize contamination. The areas they would nuke, the regime would nuke, with the radioactive isotopes. like, a lot of those areas would end up in a nuclear famine, and possibly a nuclear winter. Not only would they nuke the so-called non-dramatic areas, they'd also nuke wildlife habitats too, to help expand their, like, they'd be extremely speciesist, all in the name of militarism and imperialism. Like, the dictator would be so racist, like, he would take things to the extreme when it goes to ethnic cleansing, like imperialism. The castle would be extremely fortified. Like, what will the inside of the castle look like? Like, there would be communist spies in the fascist country who would learn about it, who would seduce them into leaking information out to the communists, which would be the Sixth International. The story would take place hundreds of years into the future. About 100 years into the future. Like, one of the concepts of a Sixth International Communism would be direct democracy. Just like how Switzerland does it. How the Swiss people do it. And the Fourth Reich is trying to get rid of democracy and bring the world to absolute monarchy. Like, their methods of doing it would include, but not limited to, habitat destruction, land degradation. How they do habitat destruction? They do it through the use of nuclear weapons. And forcibly altering... They'd even alter the climate, too. They'd forcibly alter the climate by pumping out greenhouse gases. While they pump out as much greenhouse gases as possible, basically they would turn the whole world into a carbon footprint. Like, they would turn the Earth from a self-cooling planet to a self-warming planet. The dictator wouldn't even care about the risks he'll have over his own people. He wouldn't even care about it. He'd collectivize... The dictator would even collectivize and privatize those farms. Just popping my knuckles, that's all. The hierarchy system would be based on the North Korean hierarchy called the Chilson Songbun. Songbun. in South Africa's apartheid. I see apartheid is wrong in my eyes. One of their goals would be to bring back apartheid in South Africa, like the Fourth Reich. Like they'd imperialize. They would not even care about the welfare of the animals. In fact, they would encourage people to hurt animals. Which is really sad. It's also really repugnant. It's just really repugnant. Like, they'd be selectively bred people, like those who cannot process meat at all, they'd be killed. Like, they'd genetically manipulate people to become obligate carnivores, to where they cannot process any plant material whatsoever. In the fascist controlled areas, the descendants of Tom Araya would end up being persecuted under the brutalitarian regime. If people call communists authoritarian and fascist totalitarian, I'd call Nazism brutalitarian. Like with the dictator in the fascist country, he'd have a really pervasive cult of personality. The dictator's cult of personality would be even more pervasive than Hitler. Like, with the dictator, he'd also have a really long beard, too. A la ZZ Top. Not only would he have a long beard, the dictator would also be really fat. Like, his build would be comparable to... Like, people in the fascist country, they'd see obesity as a sign of extreme wealth. They see adultery as treason, like in the dictatorship. Like, every time someone gets flogged, there'd be bloody chunks splattered all over the place where the convict gets flogged. Like, in the prison camps, prisoners' faces would be smashed with a hammer. All their bones would be broken. The prison camps will be inside. It would look like that of a horror flick. I joke about horror flicks being similar to totalitarian countries. In the prison camps, in the fascist country, prisoners, like when they get sexually assaulted, literally they'd be fucked with a knife. Like Cannibal Corpse. They wouldn't just use a knife for sexual assault. The guys, they'd be fucked with a knife. But for the ladies in the prison camp, I don't want to offend y'all, old fellers out there, but with the ladies, a chainsaw would be rammed up their private parts. To prepare people to be used for flesh, to make the flesh really tasty, they would beat the crap out of them first. Like, they'd torture and eviscerate people. Like, the definition of evisceration is basically you get disemboweled. Like, they rip out your bowels when you get your bowels get ripped out when you're eviscerated. Because what ultimately ended up killing Abigail Taylor, well, organ rejection. Because, like, her immune system rejected her intestinal transplant. The reason she received such a transplant like that is because she was eviscerated in the pool. Literally. There is a way to die like that on 1,000 ways to die. Anyways, this is it for this video. Don't forget to leave a like if you liked this video, dislike if you disliked it, subs if you loved it, and as always, thank you for watching, and share this with your comrades on social media for more, and as always, thank you for watching, and peace out.